The financial needs of a business go beyond tax and attest services. That's why CTBK goes beyond accounting services and offers outsourced solutions through their affiliation with CFO Solutions Plus. These additional services allow clients to focus on their operational and long-term strategic goals. Trust CTBK's outsourced solutions to provide cost-effective, value-added financial services tailored to your company's needs. Call CTBK at 716-630-2400. Again, 716-630-2400. Or go to ctbk.com to learn more about CTBK's outsourced solutions.
Okay, I'm always.
Welcome to another edition of Tim Graham and Friends, brought to you by CTBK, CPAs and Business Consultants. It's been a little bit. I was out of town. I was in Detroit for a full week, from the relocated Browns-Bills game to the scheduled Thanksgiving Bills-Lions game, and didn't bring my equipment with me, number one. Number two, I had piss-poor Wi-Fi in this hotel I was in Detroit. And number three, I came down with food poisoning on my last night prior to the Thanksgiving Day game. So it's been a raggedy week or so for me, and I haven't podcasted. But here we are together again. Jonah Bronstein of the New Bronstein Times and Matthew Fairburn of The Athletic. And this is week 13 of the NFL season. This game that the Bills are going to play is December 1st. So it's also December football. So this is getting late in the ball game here. And we have the nexus of Matthew Fairburn's three beats: the Bills, the Patriots, and the Sabres. We're going to talk about them all. And I'm glad that Matthew's able to join us. Where do you want to start, Matthew, since you're the guest in the center of this confluence? What stands out to you? What's most interesting to you here on November 29th, 2 days before the Bills visit the Patriots in Foxborough? And also on the same night, the Sabres are in Detroit. You got more Buffalo-Detroit action.
No, the Sabres are hosting the Avalanche. They played Detroit on Wednesday night, and they host the Avalanche, which is probably it's not ideal for the Sabres in their gate that they're going to haul on Thursday night, that the main event in town.
You don't think the Avalanche fans are going to travel for that one?
Well, yeah, you have that factor, right? You have that you're not even going to get a little bit of a boost from, a Canadian team or the Bruins or someone close by. But otherwise, this would have been a game that maybe some people would have circled: defending Stanley Cup champion, Colorado Avalanche. And instead, it's running up against the Bills Patriots, which, if it were a home game for the Bills, they probably wouldn't have done this type of a conflict to have two going at once. But because it's a road game for the Bills, I don't think it was much of a factor. And it could have been any team, but it happened to be a team that otherwise might draw a little bit for the Sabres. So,
all right. So unfortunate scheduling,
like.
Scheduling can't be the most important part of this nexus of your beats.
Probably not. But it's
what is
the first thing that came to mind.
I think it is. I think Fairburn.
It probably is. It's the only place they all collide.
I think he's more than happy to be at the hockey arena on Thursday night and not having to pay any attention to this football game.
Jonah knows me well. Jonah's been my neighbor in the press box. I'm quite enjoying myself on the hockey beat. I'm really liking being at the rink. And I was saying to some people in the media room today, because we were all talking about, man, nobody's going to be at this game on Thursday. And I was like, you know what? That makes us all the more important. Everybody's going to watch the Bills, and they're going to come and find out what happened in the hockey game. So, yeah, we got to be glued to it. I actually had kind of forgotten that, when you asked me to come on today, that all three of my beats are kind of colliding here, that they're playing the Patriots. I keep forgetting that that's this week and that they're Thursday night. And it is a pretty substantial game in the division. And it's weird that they play this late that we haven't seen these two teams match up yet, because we are learning a lot about the Patriots, I feel like, as the season goes on. And had the Bills caught them early, I think it wouldn't even have been close. But the Patriots have started to put a few things together. The Bills are stumbling a little bit. Still think the Bills are the better team by a decent margin, but the gap isn't as big as it was early in the season.
What's your read on the Patriots, where they are now? And I know that you're focusing your attention on the Buffalo Sabres on a day-to-day basis, but you were around that facility for a long time and you followed the Bills for a long time. Again, this is the second year in a row we're talking about the easiest bet on the board in Las Vegas heading into a season was the Bills to win the AFC East, and questioning that heading into the last season, or excuse me, the last month of the season, the last month and a half, because there's actually two games in January because of the 17th game. What are your thoughts here on this being way more competitive than we thought? Jonah, you don't have to chat with us. You're a member of this podcast.
Well,
You don't have to send us a chat message.
Well, maybe I don't want everybody else to know what I just said.
Oh, okay. I see.
He's
Which
not.
is
He doesn't
usually the
want
case
his,
when I chat. I don't know if that is this time, but oftentimes that's why I chat.
I can understand if there was maybe a guest who had something to sell and you wanted to, shoot me a note. But when you're just sending it to Matthew and I mean, it's just.
Usually it's a double entendre that you made unintentionally, and maybe I don't want to jump in, but I do want to, mark.
Heaven forbid this podcast be entertaining. Anything that you find witty or interesting, by all means, we should keep it amongst ourselves and not share it as part of the podcast.
All right. Well, okay. So betting on futures in the preseason about NFL teams are sucker bets, whether they're easy or long shots.
Right. I wouldn't even say that they are sucker bets, but they're also dumb bets because you lose your money and you don't get anything back. I mean, the sports book loves these futures because they get to stick it in an account and let it gain interest, or they can do things with it. Obviously it needs to be accounted for when the bet cashes out, but that money is out of your pocket for months at a time while you're hoping that you get some of it back.
Especially betting on a heavy favorite, you're putting up more money than you're risking more than you're going to get back, which I guess if you're really certain, but now with the Bills possibly not winning the division, you probably feel pretty stupid if you took that easy bet in August.
the smarter thing to do. I don't know how often those are the odds change. So you wait until something happens that drops their odds, because they're never going to be better odds than they are.
You want public confidence to waver.
Exactly, which will inevitably happen at any point in a season. I think that's, an important point about these Bills, as we've discussed a few times since I've been on the show. And when I was on with Joe a bit early in the season, I would, mention that it's a new phenomenon to be rooting for a Super Bowl favorite, but it's a marathon, right? If you get so caught up in the roller coaster of it all, it's going to be exhausting. You're going to be worn out by the time the playoffs come around. These lulls and these mid-season hiccups happen to almost every team. And you almost rather them happen in November than, if they start to linger into December and January, that's when you sound the alarm bells. But they are still 8-3. They're still, if I were putting money, I would say they're going to win the division. But it is, if you're a betting man, this would be a great time to bet the Bills, because right now people are thinking everything's up for grabs. People thought the same thing around this time last year. They haven't even played the Patriots yet. They haven't played any of these division teams at home. So in theory, it is up for grabs. But, how much has changed about the Bills from the start of the season other than the injury situation, which is significant with Von Miller and a few other players, maybe whatever's going on with Josh Allen's elbow. But lose this game and the alarm bells really start to go off, because not that I don't think the Patriots are good. I marvel at their ability to remain competitive. And, it's been such an interesting season for them. They had Bailey Zappi in at quarterback at one point. the sky was falling on Mac Jones in New England and elsewhere for a significant amount of time. The fact that he was able to go back in, kind of improve on where he was before he got hurt, and this team is still right there, sitting in, close to contention, despite a handful of, not great games and a few pretty bad losses. They're still a tough out, but I'm really fascinated by their defense above all else, because last year they were the number one defense up until right about now. And then the Bills made them look like UB's defense. They looked like completely lost against Josh Allen for 2 games. Right now, again, they're riding this great defensive run, one of the best defenses in football in all these various categories. But none of that strikes me as particularly important unless they show that they can match up against the Bills on defense. Because if they're going to be a thorn in the Bills' side in the division, whether it's this year, next year, years to come, that's how they're going to do it until Mac Jones figures it out or they find another quarterback. And if they can't match up, it doesn't matter how many times they intercept Zach Wilson or how badly, they slow down the Browns' running game or whatever else, because this is the team to beat. And the last 2 showings were abysmal for New England.
There's something big that's missing from the Bills team this year compared to last year. And you can throw out that first game in which they played. The winds were so bad. That was the game where the Patriots didn't throw the ball at all. And I know I've made this joke before, but it was almost as if Bill Belichick was just yelling across the field, "Hey, Sean, I'm going to run it." And you would think that Sean would be like, "Haha, thanks for telling me." But Belichick would say, "Sean, I'm going to run it again." And McDermott had to be thinking to himself, "Shit," because there was nothing they could do about it.
It was kind of like he had him in a headlock and was like punching him with his own hand. And he's like, "Stop hitting yourself."
Right.
Stop hitting yourself over and over.
But something that's missing from those other 2 games in which the Bills didn't punt, the rematch and then in the playoffs, Josh Allen at that time had this almost extra sensory ability to complete and make any target work. Whether you could take Stephon Diggs out of the game, but Gabriel Davis was going to do something. Dawson Knox was going to do something. Maybe even Cole Beasley was going to do something. Isaiah McKenzie seemed to be as effective last year as he's been this year in an increased role. And that's not a good thing because these guys were supposed to step up and replace the no longer here Cole Beasley and the no longer here Emmanuel Sanders. And Dawson Knox was supposed to, if not take a next step because he had such a breakout season last year, maintain. And he's done it with his receptions and his yards, although the yards are down, the yards per catch are down. But if you were to give them a pace, they're roughly the same, but the touchdowns are way down. And it's just not, the offense just doesn't have that feel of, okay, you can go ahead and take away one of our weapons, but we have so many others. Now there's this feeling that you go into any game as a Bills fan, and if you're a Bills fan, you hope the players don't feel this way. But me watching it, I think as a neutral observer, I don't feel that assurity that I did when I was talking about this team being the best in the NFL. And I think that they were for the first 2 months of the season. But I think that and you made a great point, Matthew, regarding the Patriots. I think I said this heading into the season when we were talking as a preview aspect to the Bills season and their schedule, is the Patriots having 3 months to figure their team out is not good for the Bills, that they get both of those games in December. So I guess in December or January, because the game is the regular season finale is the home game against the Patriots on either January 7th or 8th. That's TBD. But anyways, that's
how
just
the schedule worked.
Jonah, I know you wanted to jump in there.
Well, I did want to follow up just on the betting window thing that Matt had introduced earlier related to what you just said. Like, if you do still believe that the Bills are what you believe they were a month or two ago, Super Bowl favorites, their odds have now dropped from, for the first time all year, not being the odds on Super Bowl favorites, which I think is an accurate reflection of how people around the NFL probably think about the pecking order in the AFC and the NFL right now. But if you still think this team is, that team that you thought they were a month ago, you have a much better betting opportunity.
I don't.
Right. Nobody does. And it would be an interesting, psychological study about the person that's believed the Bills were Super Bowl champions all year long, but has been waiting for the perfect moment to strike in the betting market, knowing it was coming and knowing when to wait it out and not doing it after a previous loss. But anyways, and I think a lot of that reflects how well Kansas City's playing and that they look like a juggernaut again. And that loss to the Bills earlier in the season doesn't really seem to affect, the perception of who's better than who. But with the Bills, I think that this is an important game for the standings. If they fall to 0-3 in the division, that would be pretty significant. And in chasing Kansas City for home field advantage and seeding in the playoffs. But in the overall referendum of a season, they're coming off that 2 games in 5 days, and this will be 3 games in 12 days with all of the injuries and illnesses they're dealing with and the swoon in the season. I mean, I think it would be fair to expect a schedule loss to happen at some point. It didn't happen in the last 2 games, even though there seemed to be points in the game when, the Lions and the Browns were going to win, and it looked like the schedule and the practices and the traveling and the snow was going to catch up with the Bills. And this might be the game where it does catch up with the Bills, kind of like playing that 3rd game in 4 nights type feel in a different sport. And I don't think that's going to be a disaster for the Bills season if they happen to lose this game to the Patriots, even though it's the Patriots and Bill Belichick. They can still finish strong, but it's going to put them in a tough place standing wise if they drop this one.
I just want to point this out because it's something that I've looked up and I've tried to find out how rare it is that a team plays 3 games in 12 days all on the road. Now, I think that is significant. But it sounds worse than it is when you just say 3 games in 12 days. Usually there's a home game mixed in. Of course, the game against Cleveland was supposed to be in Orchard Park. But teams play 3 games in 12 days all the time. That is the same window of a Sunday, Thursday game. So if you play 2 Sundays in a row and a Thursday, that's 3 games in 12 days. Now, what throws this out of whack is the 3 road games, number one, and also that weirdness of a Thursday is supposed to be the one-off, and then you're given the extra days to reset. The Bills have back-to-back Thursday games, which is rarer, but still does happen. It's happened, I think, 5 or 6 times since 2000 that a team will play back-to-back Thursday games. Again, usually one of those is at home, not always. But yeah, this has to be just a totally off-kilter organization in terms of their ability to get into a rhythm at practices. Sean McDermott talked about that after the game. It's the 2nd week in a row that he's bemoaned a lack of fundamentals on both sides of the ball. And so I asked him, I said, how do these things creep into a team? These are professionals. It's at the end of November. Why are we talking about fundamentals? And his answer was lack of practice. For one, the practice time is important, and they missed that Friday practice for Detroit, and things have just been kind of strange. Brian Dable went to full pads today.
They didn't practice because of illness 2 days before all the snow came
right.
in. So they've had.
But then it also throws, and I asked Roger Saffold this after the Browns game that was moved to Detroit. I mean, what is all this stuff overrated? Also, we're talking about how strange this is, but it also, the Tennessee Titans a couple of years ago miss a week and a half of practice and just dominate the Bills 41 to whatever it was. The Bills, when they went and played the Jets, Doug Marrone versus Rex Ryan at Ford Field in 2014, 38-3, the Bills stomped the Jets. The Bills won. Although it was tight on the scoreboard because the Browns scored a couple of garbage touchdowns, that was a clear victory for the Bills, despite all the hardship that they went through to move the game. So sometimes these games get moved and you wonder, is all this shit overrated of preparation and routine? And, but anyways, that's a lot of word salad there. Pull out whatever you want to talk about.
They're not going to ever admit it because, I mean, these football coaches, form their identity around how often they're in the office, right? Like they're going to sleep on the couch all week and kiss their kids goodbye on Monday and see them after the game on Sunday and burn the midnight oil and find every little advantage that they can find. It would be fascinating. It would be somewhat impossible to do, a data set that we'll never get, but to find what is the exact right amount of practice. because everybody assumes that you do it the one way. You got to study X number of hours of film and practice X number of times to have the optimal performance. Because of course, in a meritocracy like the NFL, the harder you work, the better results you'll get. But as you're pointing out, it's not always about that. And I think it bleeds into an interesting point about this game that I'm wondering about. I probably won't watch the game, but maybe eventually I'll catch some of it.
Because you're going to be covering the Colorado Avalanche and
The
playing
hockey.
the Sabres, not because you're any, this is
Right.
just in
Not
case
because I'm
anybody fast forwarded
apathetic,
too
right.
much into the podcast. It's not,
Not
let
because I
anybody
just
think
don't
that you're,
get you just brought on a disinterested guest who couldn't care less about any of this. But
It'll be on people's phones and iPads in the press box. If you want to,
I was wondering if they
right.
might throw some highlights up on the big screen or something. But
if they suit the fans, sure. If Josh
but I don't
Allen,
know if it's allowed. I don't know how much it's allowed to like carry it live or anything like that. But I still think it would be a decent night of sports if you went to the hockey game. It's probably going to be over around, late second quarter of the football game. Pop over to one of the bars downtown. You watch the second half. I don't know. Maybe some people will do that. I doubt very many will. But what I'm interested in,
and it is a school night.
Oh no, I've been down there. There was a game when Tyrod Taylor was the Bills quarterback playing against New England on Sunday night. I'm sure you guys covered it. Remember what year that was? And there was a Sabres game. And then I went over to 716, and it was packed with Sabres fans and Sabres jerseys. All of a sudden, turning it, rooting for the Bills and doing the shouts on it. It was an interesting scene, kind of seeing the Sabres crowd blending into the Bills crowd.
Yeah, you can double dip realistically with a 7:00 start. It wouldn't, it's different because it's Bills Patriots and the Bills are what the Bills are now. But in that preparation word salad we were tossing there, I think last year,
as we like to do.
Yeah, just putting together a cornucopia of words. Ken Dorsey,
A human caterpillar of
human centipede
of roundabout. Yeah, human centipede of roundabout discussion.
So Ken Dorsey has been a hot topic, right? And again, one of these things that's hard to really know the impact. But last year, you had Brian Daboll on an absolute heater, going along with Josh Allen on a heater of his own. They were hitting on all the easy throws, finding all the easy answers, making something out of nothing in a lot of cases, turning bit players into stars, like you saw with Isaiah McKenzie. And Brian Daboll, the game planner against Bill Belichick, with whom he's very familiar. Some might say, well, Belichick's, just as familiar with Daboll. Yes and no. Like Daboll still, was relatively young as an offensive coordinator and still evolving and figuring himself out. Daboll was pretty intimately familiar with the preparation habits, with the defense of Bill Belichick. And I wonder if that did give them a little bit of an extra edge there. He was dealing with a quarterback who is, unlike very many quarterbacks we've seen in NFL history. So he's able to do things with his offense and put stress on New England's defense in ways that I don't think every offensive coordinator is necessarily capable of. And I think that's a big test for Ken Dorsey to assume, yes, I know the Patriots defense fell off the map last year and the Bills owned them. They very well could do the same thing towards the tail end of this year, but they have some talented players on that defense. This Bills offense is not the same. The offensive line is not playing particularly well.
They're still
Josh
scoring
Allen's,
a lot, though. There are all these things that we can look at and say, that doesn't look as sharp as last year. Stephon Diggs, and I wrote about it, and I think maybe I should have drawn more attention to it because I'm about to say I think it slid under the radar because maybe the game was on Thanksgiving and there's other things that you don't have the usual post-game, post-mortem that you go through. But Stephon Diggs said a few things that I think were eye-opening. It's not as though he was demanding a trade out of Minnesota because they're handing the ball too much to Dalvin Cook. But he did make a mention that this offense is getting more balanced than it's been, and the passing game has lost its sharpness, and that they need a couple more throws early, And Stephon Diggs saying it at a news conference, and we're all kind of sitting there, and we're familiar with Stephon Diggs's voice. I don't think it hit like it did to a lot of ears, like it did mine. But he pointed that out. And he also said that he worries about Josh Allen's body language, and that so Stephon Diggs is pointing it out. And he didn't let himself off the hook. He said he missed some too. He had a couple drops, and he's been doing that more than you would expect from one of the best contested ball receivers in the NFL. He has left some plays on the field. But I thought it was an eye opener that Stephon Diggs pointed all these things out at a news conference, that he was admitting that the passing offense is not as good as it used to be, and it needs to get better. He didn't lay blame anywhere, but I think just him saying it is significant.
And I just asked you, Tim, because you were at these games. Do you think that is maybe the theme of the conversation he had with Sean McDermott on the sideline? And both of them have been kind of coy about what was said, but if you think about the context of the game, that was what was going on. They weren't throwing.
That could be, although it was. That's a heat of the moment thing too. That may be a situation where either of those guys in that moment, because so much is going on, and the amount of energy and frustration that goes in it, and Sean McDermott's got people talking in his ear. The game is going on at this time. I wouldn't be surprised, or I wouldn't find it disingenuous if we were to sit Sean McDermott and Stephon Diggs down right now and say, what did you guys talk about? And either of them say, I'm not really sure I remember. Because I think McDermott was just trying to get through a moment and do it as best as he could, and probably saying things along the lines of, look, you're going to get your chances. I mean, because Sean McDermott, as the defensive minded coach that he is no has no ability at that moment to say, Steph, we're going to you on the next series, or, he's not going to say all these things, or you're going to get this, or this is going to happen. But that also should be noted. That happened during the Cleveland game. That was not the Detroit game. So Stephon Diggs' frustration, which we saw on the telecast, I didn't catch it during the game because I was at it and I wasn't looking there at that time, but it was shown, and it became a part of the discussion on ESPN and everywhere else. If you did see it, and those guys were asked about it afterwards. But that happened during the Cleveland game. And then it was still Stephon Diggs talking about it 5 days later after the Lions game. His not frustrations. He wasn't angry about it, but he still was voicing his concern about it. And he did it in a very diplomatic way. And as I said, in such a way, because we've gotten used to hearing Stephon Diggs talk. And I don't think that they necessarily did in Minnesota. So when Stephon Diggs talked, it was a lot of, it was trade demand type stuff. He wanted out. You knew he was upset. You'd see the outbursts on the sideline, that type of stuff. Bills fans and Bills reporters have gotten used to Stephon Diggs as a human being. He's a very likable guy. We have not seen any of whatever was built up within his reputation in Minnesota. So that he's been disarming in that regard. So I think him saying those things like he did after the Lions game didn't resonate. And had he said those in Minnesota, it would have been probably front page headlines. It would have been the lead to the story. Bills win, but receiver questions offense or passing game. That would have been over the top. But I think that there's more to it than just, oh yeah, that was an interesting thing that Stephon Diggs said after a victory, no less.
You remember Stephon Diggs didn't talk after a single game last year, which might not be relevant to anything we're talking about, but I thought maybe that's worth pointing out. And so
he talks on Wednesdays. He's one of those guys that, the Bills, I think, would like for him to talk more. The media would love for him to talk more because he's really engaging. It's enjoyable to deal with Stephon Diggs. I've been talking with him at his locker, which I think in years past was almost a no-no, not because of any rules or anything. He just wasn't open to it. He's just he's been a lot more relaxed this year. And I think that that's why, and he's a captain, he's a leader, all these things. He's been around. He's done it. He's accomplished it. He's an all-pro. He's a 1,000-yard receiver for the third straight season as a Bill and all that stuff. So I think when he said what he did after the game on Thursday, to me, it was eye-opening. And I probably should have had it higher in my story. I was probably halfway through in which I pointed out that he's concerned. I don't think he's making demands or anything like that, but it's almost to me like, and again, I don't want people to misinterpret. I think this is a good thing. To me, it's reminiscent of a conversation, and I've said it on this podcast before. I've mentioned it in passing. It was late in the season at what was used to be known as the Pepsi Center out in Amherst. The Sabres had a practice out there, and I was walking out to the parking lot with Daniel Briere. It was an interview. It was on the record. And we stopped at the door because a lot of times, you don't know if a guy, if he's got time, whatever. Daniel Briere had really little kids at the time. So he's in his street clothes. He's walking to his car, but he stopped at the door before going outside. He wanted to say some things. And he expressed that he didn't think that the Bills or that the Sabres were ready, that they are not playoff ready, that this team is taking it too easy, that they're not, you can't just flip a switch in hockey. You have to start getting playoff ready before the playoffs begin, all that type of stuff. So it was kind of a way of delicately calling out his teammates without, stabbing anybody in the back. And I think that's kind of what Diggs was doing. It was a leadership thing. I don't think he was whining, but I think it was notable what he said, that this offense is from the past. Yes, it's great that Devin Singletary is running the ball well, and the offense is balanced, and all the good things that come along with that. But this passing offense is starting to slip, and something's got to be done about it.
I think what's fair to point out here, they're dealing with different expectations than they were last year, and their bar is so much higher because of what you talked about with the way Josh Allen finished last season. He just couldn't miss. He couldn't do any wrong for a while. And
even their most crushing loss, Josh Allen was borderline flawless.
He was unbelievable, and that gave them a chance in every game. And when that fastball isn't there, the flaws are a little bit more apparent. To Stephon Diggs's point about maybe things not being as sharp, I think it's worthwhile to point out that they're going to play this game against the Patriots on December 1st. They played the wind game against the Patriots on December 6th last year. It felt, in the context of when you think back to last season, that felt early in the season for the Bills because of how big a step they took at halftime of that Buccaneers game, which was a week later, and the way they really, hit the gas pedal in the final month and a half of the season. So while it seems like a restless time that they really need to get this figured out, even Stephon Diggs thinks, it is still relatively early. There is still time, and there's time to flip the switch, as Danny Briere would have put it. And it's probably a little bit easier to do in football. You get it rolling for a couple of weeks, you get healthy, and things can go well. And they are still 8-3. It's not as if last year they lost to the Patriots and that dropped them to what? I mean, they were out of first place at that point. So even, what seemed like a 5-alarm fire after that game and the first half of the Buccaneers game, they were able to figure it out. It's not to say it's automatically going to happen, or that they can sleepwalk through the whole season and just get ready for the playoffs. There are some flaws with this team that I think are more glaring than what they had a season ago, but time still to get healthy, figure things out. And certainly, even if they lose on Thursday night, I'm sure it'll be a very similar reaction to what we saw when they lost to the Patriots in that Monday night win game, where it was, holy smokes, like, what's going on with the Bills? And as weird a game as it was, it, put the Patriots in the driver's seat, and it was like, here we go again. But all it takes when you have that quarterback is that he finds it again. And maybe if his elbow's not feeling 100% and it gets there eventually, who knows? It's a long season. It's striking how the waves are coming for fans when you see it on social media, and it bleeds through to the Sabres, I feel like, because last night they lose to the Lightning, and Jonah and I were talking about it in the press box. It's like, if they just finish that game a little bit differently and win, the conversation is so different. And that is a bizarre thing for 1 out of 82 games, for the conversation to change that drastically among
5.5 minutes.
But instead,
right?
it's an easy narrative, right? It's they blew a lead. Here we go again. They suck like they always do. They can't close games. They have terrible goaltending. All the same. You can blow it up and have the takes as a fan, and it's not real popular or engaging necessarily to say, hey, it's just 1 out of 82 games. They played pretty well, and let's see what happens on Wednesday. But that's the reality of what these guys do. And I'm still learning the rhythm of an NHL season and how all the puzzle pieces fit together behind the scenes. But it's very apparent that there's no choice but to turn the page, right? Like, okay, we blew that lead. Like, we better learn from it. And people hate to hear that, but it is interesting that the discussion around losses can be that extreme, even for hockey. It's tenfold with football. When they lose a game or they don't play well, the social media chatter gets pretty crazy and pretty dark. People go to some bad places with their team, and it's even worse with the Sabres. People are reflexively going to that place.
Just to point out a couple things, you mentioned record-wise with the Bills. It was the same week in the season. They lose to the Patriots to be 7-5. At this point, they'd be 8-4 or 9-3, depending on the results of this game. And the Sabres, so they're get the overtime point last night. They have 19 points in 22 games. They had 19 points after game 22 a year ago. But this team's playing a lot different than they were last year. And the narratives around the team are different. But as you mentioned, they lose a game. They lose a late lead to the Lightning, which I think they did 2 or 3 times a year ago. And I did it earlier this month even. It seems like more of the same old Sabres, even though there's a lot of reasons, specifically offensively, that this team isn't playing like the same old Sabres.
I think what's interesting about these Sabres too is, as I have 2 teenagers in my house who've put together Christmas lists, they have players that you want to wear their gear. I mean, that's something that the Sabres were bad, and then they also were just kind of like, let's get rid of some of these guys. What Tage Thompson is doing, and Rasmus Dahlin coming into his own, and even Skinner and Tuck with what they're at a point a game per pace.
Yeah, they are.
I'm sorry.
I said Skinner, Tuck, Thompson, and Dahlin are all at a point.
Yeah, Thompson's way above. He's got 14 goals and 14 assists in the 22 games.
But 4 players. When's the last time the Sabres had 4 players averaging a point a game?
Yeah, it's all they're fun, with the exception of that slump for a few games there. But
Tage Thompson is the most exciting player they've had
since Jack Eichel.
Since Jack Eichel, but maybe even more exciting than Jack Eichel, frankly. Like, he's different than Jack Eichel. The way he plays, his size. He's a guy that is consistently doing things, and Jack Eichel did too, to an extent. Jack Eichel's probably a better player, I suppose. But how long he remains a better player, I think, is actually a legitimate question. And nobody, when they traded Jack Eichel, would have said, that's fine. Tage Thompson will be right there with him 12 months from now. Nobody would have said that. And right now, I think you could have an argument. You'd probably still come down on the side of Eichel, but it seems almost nightly, outside of Buffalo, in hockey social media, there's people being like, holy smokes, like, look at what Tage Thompson just did. So from that standpoint, just like an exciting to watching a 6'7" guy do what he does around the net and do what he's able to do, handling the puck, feels like it feels like a reason to go to the rink for a lot of people, which has been, as Tim pointed out, not really, it's been hard to draw people in. I think it's been hard to have kids putting gear on their list for Christmas. Like, who do you pick? Right. Like, when Jack Eichel was gone and they're trading away all these big time players.
Even Reinhart, as productive as he was, he just was not endearing to the fans. I think the fans generally liked him, but there weren't people going out there and buying those jerseys. I'm guessing there weren't a lot of Reinhart jerseys in the stands.
There was no Cody Eakin jerseys on Christmas lists this time last year. And Darlene was still in kind of a weird spot in his career where people were wondering what would become of him. And so I do think it's sometimes important to isolate the variables in a season like this and go back and say, okay, at the beginning of the season, if the Sabres got to 85 points and narrowly missed the playoffs, but JJ Peterka, Dylan Cousins, Jack Quinn, Rasmus Dahlin, Owen Power, Tage Thompson, Alex Tuck all had seasons that made you excited about the future. Most people would have said that's pretty good. That's a fine year for the Sabres. That's sort of how it's playing out right now. They're still very much within striking distance of an 85-ish point season, maybe a little better if they get hot. JJ Peterka, Dylan Cousins, and Jack Quinn are all playing on the second line, and they look fantastic for the last week. That top line looks great. Tage Thompson looks like a bona fide superstar. $7 million a year looks like a pretty good deal for him. You got Rasmus Dahlin, probably going to work his way into the Norris Trophy conversation. Owen Power will probably be in the Calder Trophy conversation. And so, yeah, same results are the same as Jonah pointed out, right? 19 points in 22 games. It's been a weird start, and they were without Matthias Samuelsson for a while. They're not getting the best goaltending. There are things to figure out. There's a big gap between where they are now, where they need to be, and that's going to require some outside additions. It's going to require Kevin Adams to open up the checkbook next summer and support these young players with veterans who can, make it a little bit easier for Don Granato to balance out his lineup. But the individual variables that you wanted to see as a Sabres fan, I feel like most of them are right there. Would it have been great if Casey Middlestat had a Tage Thompson-like leap? Sure, but that's not really in the cards. Victor Olofsson and Casey Middlestat have been uneven on 5-on-5. That third line, not even really the third line anymore in terms of playing time, has not been that great. The defense has been uneven. The goaltending is still a problem.
What needs to be done about the goaltending?
I don't know.
I think there are people who are ready to give up on Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen already.
See, I just can't really wrap my head around that when there were people a week ago or a week and a half ago screaming in the 300 level and screaming on Twitter that it was time to bring them up and see what you have.
It goes back to that comment that you guys, or that sentiment last night, you and Jonah were talking about. 5.5 minutes made a big difference in how we view not only the Sabres, but UPL.
This was the reason they didn't want UPL in the NHL just yet. Not because he'll never be good, but because the path that he was on, the injuries he's had, he hasn't played a ton of AHL games. It's not unusual for him to get another full season of AHL games and be, closer. A lot of goalies play a lot in the AHL. Ryan Miller played a ton in college, then played a ton in the AHL, and then got to Buffalo. It's what needs to be done about the goaltending situation, in my opinion, is that you're getting a great look at UPL right now. He's going to have some not great games like last night. He'll have some pretty good games. He's getting a nice little window. When Eric Comrie comes back and he's fully healthy, you don't need to rush it because maybe UPL is playing well and you ride the wave. If he's not and Comrie's healthy, you plug him back in, and it's maybe the best thing for Comrie because he's a workaholic type who's always staying extra on the ice. Now he got a chance to take a step back, assess what that early season was like for him. First time as a starter, first time handling those minutes. Give him another shot to see, okay, what is this guy? Is he for sure the answer? I can't sit here and say that he is, but am I going to, just like with UPL, going to sit here after a dozen games or whatever and say he's absolutely not an NHL goalie? Like, I don't think that's fair either. So as long as Craig Anderson is healthy and can spell those two guys, that's a pretty good situation. You just want to learn what you have, both in Comrie and UPL, as much as possible going into the offseason, because I think you're going to need to spend some money probably on a goalie. Because I think what I can already start to see happen is that people are ready for Devin Levi, like in March, to jump in here and jump into the NHL net. And I just don't think that's the path that he's on. I don't think that's lines up with the way the Sabres have done anything with their young players. I would expect that in a best case scenario for the Sabres, he's signed and playing in Rochester in the spring. Obviously, the best case scenario is to get him under contract as soon as you can, so you don't end up with another, they're sitting in limbo with Portillo right now because he can hit free agency after this season. Levi's still a year away from that, but given the way he's performed, there's an understandable urgency to get him under contract. But that doesn't mean that it's like, all right, Levi's signed and it's fixed, throw him in the NHL. Like, that's probably how you break that kid, especially if you're not ready to, contend. So it's a feeling out process for the rest of the season. And then next year you figure out, maybe you go sign somebody, maybe you swing a trade. You're in a spot closer to what like Detroit thought they were in this offseason, where they go out and get Ville Husso, or Edmonton went out and got Jack Campbell. It's a weird position in the league in general because there's some randomness to it, and it's a hard one for teams to pinpoint. But I don't think it's not been their strength. I just don't think that's like the one glaring thing. Like, if they just went out and signed a goalie this offseason, this team would be in third place. Like, they were missing 3 of their top 6 defensemen for a while. They were missing Matthias Samuelsson. Eric Comrie was put in some weird, tough spots, and UPL could have had a couple last night, but a few of them were pretty tough too. And he wasn't even necessarily supposed to be up at this point in the season. So I'm not pushing the panic button just yet, but it's very clear that they don't have a firm answer at the moment. This season's about finding out. And, if it puts you in a spot, I don't think they were sitting there thinking with the youngest and cheapest roster in the NHL that they needed a goalie. And that would be the answer to carry the youngest, cheapest roster in the NHL into the playoffs. I think that makes more sense timeline wise next offseason, unless some weird opportunity presents itself where there's a young goalie entering his prime that's available via trade and it's too good to pass up. But that usually those guys get locked up pretty quick.
One thing they could do to get better goaltending is start Craig Anderson a little more often. Maybe that's not feasible at his age. It's probably not their plan, but he's their best goalie and only playing once every third game, really.
Does seem like they're willing to ramp him up a little bit more, but they haven't gotten, they've had a lot of back-to-backs recently. They had the 3 games in 4 nights last week. They have 3 games in 4 nights this week. But I agree, it's a matter of, and it was at the beginning of the season, I was talking to some people about, like, they were going to be in a weird position either way. Like, let's say Craig Anderson had caught lightning in a bottle and played outside of his mind to be able to carry the team. Like, what if the team was good enough to sneak into the playoffs and Craig Anderson is clearly your best goalie, but he can only go once every 3 games? He would have to play. He would have to empty the tank and really give you everything he had. Don Granato did mention that as the season goes on, they feel more comfortable getting him into more games because goalies, especially at Anderson's age, you don't have the same ability to train and get into regular season shape as a skater, just in the sense that you don't get to see as much live action. It's hard to simulate in your off-season training. And so he actually felt the more the season went on, the more they would be able to turn to Craig Anderson a little bit more frequently. And I think that's probably the best answer at the moment. But if he gets hurt, you're in a really tough spot, especially if he and Comrie are hurt at the same time. You're in really, really bad goal. You think it's bad now, then it would get ugly if he wasn't available, even for those once every 3 or whatever.
Do you sense that there is any urgency or anxiety, whether it's changing the strategy with the goaltenders or making a trade or making some sort of roster move to get short-term results instead of whatever was planned for the long-term development of this team and what they wanted to do in the net? Do you think they might make a move that would make them better in the short term, but it doesn't quite fit the preseason plan for the long term?
I think they would if it was a younger player that they're getting back in return. If they were going to create short-term results and sacrifice long-term, the time to do it if that was going to be Kevin Adams' instinct that he was going to panic and do that, he would have done it when all the defensemen were hurt. That would have been the most obvious time to do it. But I think if he stays consistent with what he said, then it's going to have to be a move where that player is also relatively young and not just some, 29-year-old rental, somebody who they could fit into their plan and move some of their assets and bump the timeline up a little bit. But I don't know. I'll be interested to see how Kevin Adams handles the rest of the season and into next offseason, because it's starting to get to the point where, fans are a little restless about this team because it's just more losing and it's more of the same. But there's an understanding that this wasn't going to be another year with a really young roster and some growing pains. But I think next year is where that leeway starts to run out just a little bit, where you have all this cap room and you've got all these assets developing in the minors, and you're just, at some point you have to start to push the timeline ahead. But they both got contract extensions right before the start of the season. So there was an understanding not only of their plan, but that they would have time to execute the plan the way that they see fit. So be interested to see if they swing a deal at some point to get maybe a young player who's, needs a change of scenery. The defenseman in Arizona his name has popped up. He's been wanting out of there for a while. He's still young, 24. He'd be, a huge boost to their blue line. But, are they going to part with multiple first-round picks or a first-round pick and a big-time prospect? That's where you'll start to learn about Adams as a general manager, I think, because as big a deal, the Eichel deal was huge, and I thought he did pretty well in that. But other than that, it's been a lot of subtracting and drafting, right? Subtracting players, drafting players, signing very low risk deals, low exposure deals where you're just like, Eric Comrie, if that doesn't work out, well, you only paid him short money. Ilya Lyubushkin, same thing, handing out these big contracts to players that they've drafted and developed, or in Tage Thompson's case, traded for and developed, but still getting to nut cutting time at some point where the moves are going to be a little bit more big time. They're going to be more heavily scrutinized, and it could go one way or the other. And at some point you gotta stick your neck out. The Bills were that way. That was Stephon Diggs, right? Signing Mitch Morse, that big free agent offseason they had, and then getting Diggs the next year. At some point you need to make those moves to say, all right, here's the window starting to open. Let's crack it open a little bit wider.
But the Bills made some of those moves right away. Jordan Poyer, Micah Hyde, and they backed their way in, but they make the playoffs the first year with McDermott. What I think is weird about the Sabres is they're already have a record playoff drought, and it's going to be extended to 12 seasons this year. And there's really seems to be no urgency that's like, this has to end this year. And I don't even know how much feeling there is that it has to end next year, although maybe the fans feel that way.
Yeah, that's where
maybe Tim feels that way.
I think at this point, the team's been losing a lot of money. I don't think that, teams in the NHL generally aren't very profitable on a year-to-year basis. You need to make the playoffs to turn a profit. And Terry Pegula seems to be, as Matthew pointed out, with those contract extensions for both Kevin Adams and Don Granato to start the season, willing to be patient and keep eating money. And I know that that's led to a lot of people speculating that Terry Pegula's got the team on the block. And I don't think that's true based on what I've been told, and also anecdotally in conversations I've had with Terry Pegula at the NFL owners meetings back in March. We had a lengthy off-the-record conversation about his excitement about the Sabres moving forward. It wasn't as though he was trying to pitch me or he was talking for the sake of a story. It was that Matthew, you were even there because you were still an NFL writer at the time. You're at the NFL's owners meetings. In fact, I'll say it. I'll tell people how the sausage was made. I was having such a good conversation with Terry. I sent Matthew to go fetch me a drink because I didn't want to leave the conversation and then have to reinsert myself. It's the art of the schmooze, I guess. But anyways, Terry was talking about JJ Paterka being, a bright spot and all these players that he was looking forward to seeing. This was not a guy who's selling the team. Anyways, I digress. I think it's a guy who's willing to be patient, and he clearly trusts these guys. And I think whether for good or for ill, I think we've had that discussion before about if trusting people you like can be more dangerous than maybe being a little wary of somebody who's willing to tell you no or go against the grain. But Terry Pegula has people that he trusts, much like it took Ralph Wilson a long time to find the people that he trusted. That never did work out because that turned out to be Russ Brandon and a handful of other insiders who'd been there with him through the Super Bowl years. And Terry Pegula seems to have found guys he likes, and they're clearly being patient. And all you need to do is look at how they address the goaltending situation heading into this season as proof that this was not a win at all costs mentality. And I don't think that you can necessarily flip that switch. I mean, the Sabres are going to have to show an awful lot for the remainder of this season, and particularly down the home stretch, as a team that is worth going all in on. This is a slow build, unlike, again,
the New Jersey Devils. They could have done what the Devils did. Devils made a few key moves, one of them being a goaltender that's helped them, and they took a big leap.
Yeah, but you mentioned with the Bills backing in with that's Sean McDermott's first season there, with Tyrod Taylor, and that was a borderline accident in which Sean McDermott tried to short circuit it a couple of times with Nathan Peterman. Anyways,
the only big
I just don't see the Sabres
made that year mid-season. Brandon Beane did adjust and say, okay, got to feel the pulse of my team. We got a shot to make the playoffs. And at the deadline, he traded for Kelvin Benjamin. So
it seemed like a big deal.
And it was not. It did not help very much at all. So I think the big thing for me with the Sabres, and I understand that people have
Kelvin Benjamin, a guy he knew, by the way.
Right. And it did not.
I think that's an element of that's kind of interesting. It's not just like, I need somebody, I'm just going to hope I get, he thought that he could fix that. And anyways,
he cut him like 12 months later, or maybe less.
But it was like a rental move. It was
he cut him because it didn't work.
Playoff. Yeah.
He had a contract that he could have stayed for a little longer, but it just wasn't working. And Benjamin kind of washed out of the league, but they made probably more moves that offseason to make their team worse in the short term. Yes, Poyer, Hyde, they made some of those moves, but getting rid of Watkins, getting rid of Darby, getting rid of Darius, they were kind of slowly.
They continued to unload
Gilmore.
The
they pushed out the door.
Picks. Yeah,
Gilmore. They didn't re-sign. They made no effort. So, there's always going to be the comparisons to the Bills and which stage are they at, and I think they are still in the 2017 stage. I know last year wasn't very good for the Sabres either, but I think hockey's just a different sport, and how you build your team and how quickly you can do it, how big a role free agency plays. It's a very different sport. And I think you just have to, it's hard when you have scars of an 11-year playoff drought and you've seen rebuilds fail. And it's hard to tell fans like, hey, just be patient, man. It's like, yeah, I've been being patient. It's, 11 years that this team hasn't been in the playoffs. I've been about as patient as a hockey fan can be, but that has nothing to do with Don Granato and Kevin Adams and what they're trying to do. And I think the worst mistake you can make, and it's the same with the Bills, is to sit there and say, because of what happened the last 11 years, now Kevin Adams, you need to do this, or Don Granato, you need to do this. I think that's the worst mistake you can make. I know that the context matters to the fans, and it matters to the people who pay for tickets and watch this team every night. But if you're ever going to break that cycle, I think the way that you do it is to try to do it, the right way. Could that fail? Could they pick the wrong players with these draft picks or fail to develop guys? Sure. Do they need to have some urgency to win at some point? Yes. I think there's plenty of urgency in the locker room. I don't think they're okay with how last night went. They were pretty upset. They were pretty angry at, there's plenty of emotion in that game. Dahlin was pretty pissed off at Kucherov going after their goalie. They're not going through the motions. as a group of players. But at the same time, to say, well, just trade a first round draft pick and get, whatever the equivalent of Taylor Hall is floating around the league and plug him in. It's just
Kelvin Benjamin,
the Kelvin Benjamin of the,
Taylor Hall and Kelvin Benjamin were
part of it too. I think part of it too is like they don't want to block. If they had gone out and signed a bunch of players, they would have blocked. You're not going to see Jack Quinn and JJ Peterka doing what they're doing because they'd be bumped down the lineup, maybe even be in Rochester, and they didn't want to do that. So I think while you don't know how it will play out and you don't know whether Kevin Adams and Don Granato are necessarily the right people for the job, because it's impossible to know that until you see the final product. The only thing you can do really is wait to see how it all plays out and see, okay, what does Kevin Adams do next offseason when the urgency should be higher, the bar should be higher, and you should say, okay, spend some of that money and start to fill out this lineup, get rid of guys that aren't working. If Casey Middlestat continues down this path, or Victor Olofsson, find upgrades, get a deeper lineup, fill out the defensive core, get a goalie. If he sits on his hands for too long, that can be a problem too. But we've seen, Tim Murray say, all right, we tanked for a couple of years. We got Jack. Now it's time to put the pedal to the metal and go get Ryan O'Reilly and Robin Lehner and Evander Kane. That didn't work out too good either. So they've committed to a way of building it. And I think the real payoff is still to come. Lindy Ruff was pretty complimentary of the Sabres, thinking that maybe things will click for them at some point. As Jonah and I were laughing about, he said, it could be tomorrow, it could be next week, it could be a month from now, but he did not say it could be tonight when they were playing against the Devil.
That was
it won't be tonight.
Too. He was only set up to talk about Tage Thompson, and he pivoted to saying he was impressed by the whole Sabres lineup.
So they were a lot like them, right? A lot like the Devils, who you see how teams are. I marvel a little bit at Don Granato's ability to see the big picture and his willingness to share his internal dialogue about the league. And he's said a couple times this year that he sees the league. He sees that there are teams that are going to age out, which I think everybody thinks and chats about behind the scenes. But for Don Granato, the coach of a team at the bottom of the standings, to just say that, we all know who he's referring to, right? You've got the Lightning. You've got the Bruins are a pretty old team. These teams that have been around, Washington that are going to age, which is true. They will. And he's basically saying they have to be ready for when that happens and to be one of those young teams that's coming together because the league is trending so much younger. And so it's not like they're just, flying blind and saying, well, if we just get young, everything will be fine. They have a plan. Like I said, I can't sit here and tell you for sure that it's going to work, but there's a thought process that seems a little bit more well put together than what was here previously. I didn't cover those teams, but from the stories I've heard, this seems like it's a little bit more, aligned and put together, and they've got some pieces that they didn't have then. So we'll see how it goes. But in the short term, it's going to be a little bit of a bumpy ride. They're going to have some great nights and great runs, and then they're going to have some moments that show that they've got 20-year-olds skating all over the place.
So you don't think they should sign Odell Beckham?
Well, I'd like to see it. It would certainly be good for business. That would be the biggest name on the roster for sure.
Although it could be an issue with all the flights and all the, all those road. That's 41 road games.
Yeah, he's not good on the plane, it seems. He's
Although
not too
charter
good on the
flight
airplane.
attendants maybe are a little less strict with your seatbelt. They might not come along and check it as rigorously on a charter flight than they would on American Airlines. Anything else to talk about?
Yeah,
boys?
I want to throw something at Tim real quick. While you were having food poisoning in Detroit, you missed 90s night at the arena, which was a fun game. As much as the Sabres haven't been that much fun this past month, that was a fun night. But I didn't
realize it until Bucky Gleason posted a clip on Twitter I covered the last game in which they wore those goat head jerseys. That would have been the 2006 Eastern Conference Finals.
Oh, is that picture where you guys are in the press box and it's all of you from the Buffalo News?
That would have been, I don't know if it was from that series, but it was from that postseason.
Well, I wanted to get your perspective as somebody that covered a team in that era when they wore those jerseys, you know, what you thought about seeing them come back. But what do you remember? Because they're so beloved right now. How popular were these uniforms?
Nobody liked them.
Yeah. And did anybody use the phrase goat head back when these were
Yes.
the logo? Okay. Because I don't remember
the goat head jersey. Yeah, that was what they were called, the snorting goat, because, you know, there was like I don't know if there was a puff of smoke was just coming from the video scoreboard or if that was, but anyway,
they didn't do the other night. And there's some good questions in the press room about whether that could be brought back or found in the bowels of the arena.
No, they did. They were disliked because they weren't blue and gold. And it was a Regas thing too. So that had negative connotations. One of the most,
wasn't it a Seymour Knox thing though? Like he was the one that.
No, it was Adelphia Cable colors. Regas changed the team's color scheme to match the Adelphia Cable color scheme.
In the video from the night that they're launched, Seymour Knox III is in there saying we needed this change, blah, 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 blah.
Well,
he was at the arena. So
there was a hostile takeover. No, that's not, I don't want to say that. There was some finagling going on behind the scenes. Regas was a part owner. So I'd have to go back and look at the history of that. That actually predates me coming to Buffalo. I came here in January of 2000. So I encourage people to take a look at that because I'm not, none of us were covering sports at that point in Buffalo. But no, they were disliked because of the color scheme. And one of probably the coolest nights, one of the most kind of lump in your throat nights that I've ever covered. And this is somebody who didn't grow up with the blue and gold, but was when after Tom Golisano bought the team and Larry Quinn, and they brought out the blue and gold old jerseys at the end of the season. There was rumors going around that they were going to do that. All the players wore them, and just you could feel it in the arena. You also, because you have to keep in mind, it wasn't just a change of the uniforms back to blue and gold. It was the owner was arrested. The team was bankrupt. The team might leave. The NHL had to operate the team while it was in bankruptcy and didn't have an owner. Tom Golisano kind of emerges with Larry Quinn and bringing back the nostalgia. It was, you could really feel it. And that was one of the coolest nights, maybe the coolest night of a sporting event. And definitely from a regular season standpoint that I've ever covered. And that was, a lot of it had to do with just the fans being tired of black and red, and they wanted the old Sabres back. I think people just, they despised it.
I kind of felt,
but this is the old thing. Or how about the Phoenix Coyotes, the original Phoenix Coyotes jerseys, which I always thought were pretty cool. Those were hated, you know, the old Southwest motif with the art. And then they came back a few years ago and people were saying, this is the coolest jersey of all time. People just love nostalgia, and they remember what it was like to cheer for the Sabres when they wore the black and red, because it took a little while for them to phase that out. The NHL didn't just let them immediately go from the black and red to the blue and gold again. So you still had another season or two of Drury and Briere wearing it. You got to see your favorite players, Ryan Miller, wear it. The video that they did was really cool of Ryan Miller on the motorcycle going around. Although they did Machine Head as the song, they should have done the orchestral version of Rock You Like a Hurricane, which is how all the broadcasts started back then, which would have been cooler, I think. But it was. I think there were good memories in seeing it because it brought back the 05-06 team, which was maybe the greatest. I'm going to say it was the greatest team in Sabres history because that was the team that had the best chance to win the Stanley Cup, even though they didn't make the finals. That's what, and Lindy Ruff agrees with me on that. So yeah, I thought it was really cool, but yeah, it was there. Nobody gave a damn.
Yeah, I feel like the feeling
about it when they left. Nobody was sad to see those jerseys go.
I feel like the feeling you described when they brought the blue and gold was a little bit of what they had going last week. You know, you had Thanksgiving Eve, you had everybody home for the holiday, building was packed, and you saw those uniforms and it was like, oh man, like remember when the Sabres were
15
good?
years ago, add 15 years ago to the kid who was falling in love with the hockey at that time, and it's probably the highest point of his hockey fandom as a Sabres fan, is now old enough to buy those tickets. You know, they're coming home from college. They're on. That's a great that's a great Thanksgiving break game to attend. All that type of stuff. So I'm sorry, Joan, I talked over you.
No. I just said Alex Tuck which wasn't the point you were making.
Yeah,
he's somebody that came of age, and that's the Sabres of his childhood wearing.
But at that time, watching it, the fans they hated it.
Yeah, it was funny. I talked to the guy that designed it, and he was just like loving that they were bringing him back. And he's like, he still loves the design as much now as he did, however many years ago. And he's finally getting his due, put it that way. Because I didn't get that sense either that it was a wildly popular jersey at the time. And certainly if you're the designer and you hear it's immediately referred to as a goat head when that's not really what you were going for.
Right.
His line was that hopefully they're saying that because they mean greatest of all time. And I was like, yeah.
No, the
yeah,
goat
maybe.
head, in fact, you raise a great point. And I talked all about it and I talked all around it. The goat head was a pejorative. They called it the goat head because they didn't like the way it looked. If there was pride in it, they would have called it the buffalo head or the whatever.
Right.
They would have called it something better, but it was called the goat head to mock it.
Yeah. Tough if you're the one who drew it, but he's getting his due now. That's all that matters. So
I hope he got paid at some point. So
he was working for some firm that, was working through the league. So he's doing just fine for himself. But it was a fun night at the arena. The only thing missing was everybody's favorite beat reporter from when they wore those black and red jerseys.
Bucky Gleason.
He's been absent from the press box all season.
John Vogel.
The fans are really clamoring for his return.
Bob DeCesare.
People always wonder.
How about this? Let's think about it for a second. Who on the beat? I can think of only Paul Hamilton. Maybe there's somebody else who actually is still left that covered that team. Nobody at the Buffalo News covered that team.
Art Voice.
Art Voice.
Yeah.
Does Art Voice still exist? How about Sports and Leisure? Who's the Sports and Leisure Sabres writer? I don't recall.
Paul would have been there, right?
Paul is it.
What about Duffer?
Oh, John Worrell.
Was Duffer around? Warrow was around.
Duffer was not around.
Marty was playing.
So Marty played in it. But yeah, that's the PR staff, everybody in that I would say 90% of that press box did not cover that team. And I'm including some of the there's some other people up there who do freelance work that are there.
What about Bonini?
Oh, Adam Bonini would have been around. Does he attend hockey games?
He was at Jack Eichel game.
I think. Well, no, you're right. You're saying people that would have covered any. See, I was thinking the beginning. Yeah, Adam Bonini, but yeah, there's probably a few others. But there's less people covering these games.
Bill Hoppy. Yeah, Bill Hoppy. Yeah. Bill Hoppy would have also.
I mean, Mike there's a few. Probably even covered a few games in that era. I don't think I did, but I was in the business. I could have, in theory. I didn't, but I could have. But it hasn't been quite that long. But
Dave Reichert.
Right. Yeah, there's.
He's a freelance.
Andrew Kulik from Art Voice. He was at that game. Art Voice used to usually, I think, have two people at the games. Now Andrew Kulik takes. Me and Fairburn make the joke though because the credential says Art Voice. It doesn't have
Randy Schultz.
It could be
Randy Schultz still up in the press box.
Yep, and Janet Schultz.
Randy and Janet.
There's also probably a lot of television crew for MSG that has.
Yeah, but that's crew. I'm talking about people who covered it, who went down the locker room and had to talk with these guys and deal with them. And I would still say it's a good 80% of the people up there.
Bud Bailey, if he was able to get a credential, would count.
He's not credentialed?
His organization, I don't believe, is credentialed.
Well, not a lot. All the people in that picture that I've posted of the Buffalo News covering the Sabres in the playoffs, taken by Harry Skull, I believe, who is still around. But it is of Bucky Gleason, John Vogel, Bob DeCesare, Jerry Sullivan, and me. And not only were we not there, we'd been gone for 4 fucking years.
Well, not Johnny. I mean,
no, I mean, from the Buffalo News.
Sure.
From the Buffalo News.
And at least Jerry Sullivan's still in the writing game. He's been to
Sully was at he's been to more Sabres games than Tim this year.
When I was in charge of Sully for 1 week, I said, "Sabre, you're covering the Sabres."
He's been to one.
I got to get out there.
I dare you.
How about maybe I'll show up Thursday
in the middle of the Bills game?
No, I just I just won't cover the Bills that night. I'll cover the Sabres instead.
By all means.
Seats.
Plenty of them.
Matthew, thanks for joining us. A lot of people, well, not everybody listening who's not named Jonah Bronstein or Tim Graham, would not have been aware that Matthew has been waiting for a phone call and was in jeopardy of walking right off the podcast at any time, but we survived.
The subject is not that eager to call, apparently.
And he had a busy day. Oh, hey, let's talk about this real quick, since we have you. Really cool how your Gilbert Perreault story in the NHL 99 series came about. And again, I'm fluffing you here a little bit, but I kind of enjoy it. So it's not like it's any kind of work to do. But I thought it was pretty freaking badass for a guy who's been on the beat for about 10 seconds to come in and get Wayne Gretzky on the phone, not through a PR person either, gets Wayne Gretzky's number, sends Wayne Gretzky a text about the subject, gets a call back quickly from Wayne Gretzky to share stories that we couldn't find anywhere. Now, maybe they've been told somewhere, but I did my damnedest looking at different newspaper archives that I have subscriptions to. We talked to Bucky Gleason about it. Nobody has any recollection of Wayne Gretzky talking about his adoration of Gilbert Perreault for this story. And I just thought that was really friggin' incredible that I never wrote that story. Jim Kelly never wrote that story. Bucky Gleason never wrote that story. And people whoever in Edmonton covering the team, Jim Matheson and all those guys, nobody ever got it. Anybody in Brantford, the Toronto media never wrote about it. What are your thoughts on that now that it's been published and you pulled that off?
Yeah, it was bizarre that it kind of it's weird because I haven't been covering hockey. That's why I was calling you and I was calling Bucky and I was talking to some other people to be like, is this like going to be like Ryan Fitzpatrick wearing his wedding ring on the field? Like it's a story that's been told 100 times, but I haven't been paying close enough attention over the years. And I went and dug up his autobiography and all this stuff. And there's passing reference to Gilbert, but nothing real in depth. And it was actually Danny Gare who tipped me off. And I was talking to him and it was sort of a throw-in at the end of the conversation where he was like, I played with Wayne Gretzky and sat next to him in the locker room and we were good buddies. And he would always talk about how much he loved Gilbert Perreault and loved the Sabres and all this. And I was like, no kidding. Like, that's wild. Like, and so then it was like, man, it would be cool to get Wayne on the phone and, found a number and, thanks to our vast, network of hockey writers at The Athletic. I mean, that's the type of thing that if I don't work at The Athletic and I don't have somebody like John Vogel, just pulling off a story like Gilbert Perreault without the help of, people that have covered this team and the perspective. I knew how much he meant to people in Buffalo, but I didn't know nearly enough about him until I reported the story, but I knew how much he meant and I knew I had to get it right. And that's what struck me is that Wayne Gretzky was willing to pick up the phone for somebody that he's never met because it was Gilbert Perreault and he wanted that I know a lot's been written about him and Gordie Howe, and Gordie Howe was his guy, but it sounds like Joe Perreault was right there, neck and neck, as far as favorite players. And you can see the influence in the style of play. Obviously, nobody's ever done it like Wayne Gretzky, but there was more than just Danny Gare was saying, like, man, like Joe Perreault played like Wayne Gretzky before Wayne Gretzky type of thing. And Wayne took it to another level, but that really helped kind of bring the whole thing together. In addition to, of course, all the, really going back in Sabres history and talking to some people that were still around. And it was fun. It was, there's not that many times where it happens where you're like geeked out when the phone rings and you're like, holy shit. Like, but Wayne Gretzky was definitely one of those moments.
Yeah, that was a great job. I just wanted to make sure to mention it here on the podcast. It's the first time you've been on since that story ran. So I'm just really impressed with that. Great job.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Jonah, any,
great job.
let's do a podcast Friday and we'll talk college basketball, because we'll talk about what happened with the Bills the night before, and we'll take a run around the Big Four. Jonah, does that sound good to you?
There's a UB football game Friday afternoon, but maybe after that football game, or maybe in the press box, me and Andre Robinson from Challenger News can jump on and we can just do it live in the press box.
I'd like
during
that.
The game.
I'd like during the game. Yeah, that'd be great. And it sounds like that wouldn't be too unusual from what I understand.
Nope.
For Jonah Bronstein, for Matthew Fairburn, I'm Tim Graham. Thank you for listening to Tim Graham and Friends, brought to you by CTBK, CPAs and Business Consultants. CTBK is more than just a full-service accounting firm. They are one team with an innovative approach to accounting and rise to each new challenge with collaborative problem-solving skills. CTBK goes above and beyond by lending helping hands in the Buffalo and Niagara communities through volunteer work and donations, and is partnered up with Victory Sports for 2022 to help keep kids in the community active. The professionals at CTBK are determined to help individuals and businesses succeed. Whether a large corporation, a small business, or somewhere in between, call CTBK at 716-630-2400 and see what CTBK's one-team approach can do for you.